Waiters, what is the most awkward date you have witnessed at work? Story 1. I worked in a resort hotel, high-end, and I waited tables in a fine dining restaurant. It was pretty common for people to propose there, so much that I had a system for the whole thing. One guy came in and wanted to do the ring in the champagne thing, and I talked him into doing a dessert alternative that doesn't result in a sticky ring and champagne all over the floor. Anyway, long story short, I bring the ring and she says, "Damn it, I've told you before I'm not marrying you." He flips out. She's super calm about it and basically treats him like a child having a tantrum. Which, to his credit, he was not screaming or anything, just very upset. He left, she ate the dessert, and finally he came back and paid and they left together. Super awkward. Story 2. I work at a dinner theater and we usually do proposals where we set up a random draw where the winner comes up on stage to win their prize and then gets surprised by their partner who proposes. It's usually sweet and makes everybody in the room all fuzzy and warm. Now, this one guy wanted to take it further and requested to perform a song. He brought his own music and everything. We're pretty easygoing at this job, so we agree to let him do it. We do the fake draw. The woman comes up on stage in front of a room of 400 people, and the music starts to play. Apparently, this guy was a little nervous, and he compensated by having a few drinks. So what follows is a slurred performance of a song written by this guy that seemed to focus on how he was sorry for cheating on this woman with her sister, and at the end of it, he gets down on one knee and proposes. Usually, this gets a round of applause, encouraging the person to say yes, but not after that train wreck of a performance. The poor woman was just holding her face the entire time and starts shaking her head and says, "No, what's wrong with you?" She storms off and leaves him and our stage manager on stage to a bunch of murmuring from the audience. The only thing our stage manager can think to say on the mic is, "Well, that's that." The guy ended up staying for the rest of the show and had many, many more drinks. That was years ago, and it still remains one of the cringiest things I've ever seen. That absolutely is cringeworthy. I can only imagine the awkward silence that must have filled the room after the proposal. And to make matters worse, the guy stays for the rest of the show and continues to drink? Yikes. It's definitely a memorable story, but not in the way that anyone involved probably wanted it to be. Story 3. There's a habit of some older couples where the elderly gentleman will order on behalf of his wife. I guess it might have been cute and romantic once, but it doesn't work with some younger couples. I was serving a younger couple, maybe in their early 20s, who seemed pretty early into the relationship. They were ordering drinks and he orders her drink for her. Far from being dazzled by him knowing what she wanted, she didn't want any of it. "Well, I'd actually like a latte, not a Coke, but fine, whatever, if I don't get a say." He responded quite angrily with, "Oh, sorry, have what you want." She got her latte and he glared at me. They ate and left. Not been in since. I'm sure they're doing well. Story 4. A guy proposed to his girlfriend at the booth across from my friends and me at Olive Garden. When he got down on one knee and opened the box, she was shaking her head and just stared silently. It must have been a whole 30 seconds of pure silence, but it felt like an eternity. Then the guy proceeded to describe the ring, how much it cost, the different aspects of it. Finally, the girl just went, "No," and the guy just sat back and they tried to finish their dinner. I caught eyes with our server and he made the most perfect, "Holy hell, that was bad" face. Geez, was that awkward. Story 5. I guess a husband and wife is a date. From the last time a similar question was asked, it's been more like 13 or 14 years now. Now, I waited tables at the Olive Garden 10 years ago. Not really messed up as much as it is funny. A guy and his wife sat down at the table and immediately started arguing. Something about his affair and how a baby from it was costing them money. Finally, it culminated as I was bringing out their salad. As I walked away, I heard the wife say, "Well, maybe if you hadn't boned our son's girlfriend and gotten her pregnant, we could afford to eat somewhere nicer than the damn Olive Garden." Oh, look, the highlight of my meals, unlimited bag salad. Maybe you could save up and we could go to Joe's Crab Shack for our anniversary. A-hole. Man, Olive Garden is really getting a shaft in these stories. Looks like the Olive Garden isn't just famous for its unlimited salad, but also for its unlimited drama. Maybe they should start offering free couples therapy sessions along with the breadsticks. On the bright side, at least they found a place to have their argument and get in their greens in one day. Story 6. A really little guy, maybe 5'4", 120 pounds, comes in with a gigantic woman, probably 6 foot tall and easily 300 pounds. They're both tatted up with piercings to match. The woman orders her dish, and before I get the guy's order, he says in a sexy voice, "I think you want more than that." She smirks at him and says, "You know I do," and orders 3 more entrees. This was clearly a thing for them. They seemed incredibly happy together and became regulars at my restaurant. I feel like I played a not insignificant role in this bizarre couple's eating fetishes for like 3 years. Story 7. Was a cocktail waitress at a bar in a high-end restaurant a couple years ago. This couple comes in around peak hours. The guy looks annoyed. The girl looks really excited. The whole time the girl is trying to talk to this guy, he's completely ignoring her. He gets a call and talks on the phone for a good 10 minutes, hangs up, and starts talking to anyone around him but her. He gets more and more drunk and then starts hitting on the female bartender and eventually the cocktail waitresses, myself included, telling us that he could get us all better jobs in Atlanta. The girl that he's on a date with has started crying at this point, and once he actually notices, he yells at the bartender because it was obviously the restaurant's fault for her being upset. She yells at him to stop yelling at the bartender because he's being such an awful date, and he goes off, tells her that he didn't even want to eat there, she should have picked a better place, and he isn't paying for her food and drinks. He then tells her she didn't look fat in her picture, and he wouldn't have asked her out if he had known that she was that big. Apparently they met online kind of thing. She retreats to the bathroom, and the guy continues to make a scene. Another girl at the bar and I go out to check on her while the bartenders and the manager try to deal with him. The girl is super upset, and I tell her that, hey, there's a back door you can leave through, and I can get her tab from the bartender. I go back, and the guy already stormed out and refused to pay, leaving his date with a nearly $200 check. She didn't have the money to pay, so a couple of the bar regulars covered it. Made the whole night super awkward and stressful. Definitely one of the more memorable experiences of that place. Story 8. One of my first jobs in New York was managing a lounge and cocktail bar in a high-end hotel. At around 3 or 4 o'clock, a guy that looked pretty cheesy, like slick back hair, bad suit, came up to me and demanded that he get that window table tonight for his date. He had a reservation for 8 p.m. I explained to him that, hey, I can't guarantee that, and he slipped me $400 with the "how about now" look, in which I eventually caved in and told him that I would take care of it. He then pulled out another stack of hundreds and started counting them out in front of me, asking if I could go a little extra by coming over to the table when he was there with the date and pretend that I knew him from a movie. Now, at this point, I've gone this far, so why not? Sure enough, he rolled around later in the evening with a blonde bimbo after he had a glass of champagne, and I approached the tables around them, checked in on how they were doing before going over to him and did the whole thing. Hey, how are you enjoying your evening? And before walking off, I did an Oscar-worthy double take with the, are you by chance, you must be. Now at this point, he had this douchey smile lapping up the recognition he was getting from this young dude he'd just paid off. Most importantly for him, though, it worked. She was loving it. And they left shortly after, and he slipped me another $600 on the way out. Well, it looks like the cheesy guy's plan worked out for him. You got the coveted window table and a little extra ego boost to go with it, all for the low price of like $1,000. I guess when you're trying to impress a blonde bimbo, money talks louder than actual charm or personality. As for the poor bartender, I guess he got a little extra cash for his acting skills. Maybe he can use it to buy some self-respect. Story 9. Bartending a day shift at an upscale Italian place in a high-end shopping center over the Christmas season. A couple comes in, starts drinking, and is very flirty with each other. They clearly liked the attention. I wasn't quite sure why the man seemed familiar, but he had a face that I knew from somewhere. Midway through their lunch, the woman used his name, and it dawned on me that the man was the husband of my previous boss. I told him that he looked familiar and asked if his name was Mark from that restaurant on the way to the beach. And he said that he was not, but the woman that he was with was insistent on making it awkward and peppered me with questions like, "I've heard the owner of that place is crazy. Do you know her?" She was backhandedly trash-talking Mark's wife, and the whole thing was just so uncomfortable. He was an all-around bad dude, though, and totally deserved it. Now, for additional context, his family had owned that restaurant on the way to the beach, and his wife, my former boss, ran the place until she caught him cheating. They divorced, she got the restaurant, and continued to run it with her sister. Fast forward a few years, and the two eventually remarried. It was during their second marriage that he turned up at my bar with his mistress. Story 10. When I was waitressing in college, I witnessed the single most embarrassing thing to happen to a person on a date. Right in the middle of their dinner, and in the middle of our Friday night dinner rush, this poor guy stands up, taps his wine glass to get everyone's attention, and then proceeds to tell everyone what a fantastic person his girlfriend is, how much he loves her, how lucky he is to have her in his life. The whole time that this is happening, she's just sitting there watching him with the most boring look on her face. It was so weird. Kind of like, yeah, tell me something I don't know. Then the poor guy pulls out a ring, gets down on one knee, and asks her to marry him. She gives him the most disgusted look imaginable and says, "This is the ring you expect me to say yes to? Are you dumb? Could you be any cheaper?" Then she gets up and walks out, leaving the poor guy just kneeling there. I didn't charge him for the meal. Story 11. So I'm not 100% certain, but one time I think someone went to the chain that I worked at to meet their mail order brides. It could have been escorts looking back on it, but I thought this at the time. It was two guys in suits that came in seeming really nervous. One comes up to me and lets me know what the girl looks like in case she's confused when she comes in. I've never gotten a heads up like this before, and he seemed super nervous and kind of sketched out. So the women come in, and they don't speak very good English, and they have really heavy accents, which stood out in a small neighborhood. They were dressed very minimally for it being cold and raining outside. I point them to the table and the two men, and they're introducing themselves like it's the first time that they've met, with like awkward hugs and asking about their flights. I got to overhear some of the stilted conversation and talk of money while passing by. The other time was when an ex of mine came in with his girlfriend, and she left crying for some reason halfway through. Apparently, he brought up that we dated, and he kept looking at me, which somehow caused the whole scene. Well, that's one way to spice up your love life, I guess. Like, who needs Tinder when you can just order a bride straight to the restaurant? Although I hope these guys realize that love isn't something that you can just order online like a pizza. As for the ex and his girlfriend, I guess you should have just left his emotional baggage at home, and not brought it to the restaurant. Maybe next time you'll think twice before trying to make his current girlfriend jealous in public. Or at least have the decency to order a pizza instead of putting us through that drama. Story 12. I was at one of those fancy speakeasy type bars that they've started opening up, installing an invoice printer for their point of sale system. Now, waiting for the printer firmware and driver to install can take like 30 to 40 minutes on slower computers. So I'm just people watching. As I'm standing there watching the bars fill up, I notice a gorgeous blonde in her late 20s is sitting with a very well manicured looking guy in his mid 40s. He's dressed like he just left a high dollar law firm, and she looks like she's going to a professional fancy cocktail party after their date. He is polite, talkative, and super into her, but you can tell that she isn't reciprocating the feelings. To be honest, by the look on her face, she's anywhere but in that bar at the moment. The guy goes to the bathroom, and she quickly picks up her phone and frantically calls someone and begs for a pickup ASAP. The gist of the call was that the guy was her mother's coworker, and her mother had set up the date, and our girl just really wasn't feeling it. About 15 minutes later, a guy around her age comes in, throws some cash on the table, and excuses them. She cites some vague emergency and is escorted out. The older guy continues drinking, like a $140 tab, note that I'm standing at their main cash register, and then starts flirting with the waitress, fails to get her number, and pays an exact change without tipping, and leaves. Story 13. This wasn't a romantic couple, but it was a father and his daughter. I thought everything was going fine, but I could tell that I was intruding in on times that they wanted to be alone, so I tried to adapt and stay out of their way. I don't know what happened, but suddenly the daughter begins to cry, and I had no idea until I approached and asked how everything was. Immediately, he looked annoyed, which was understandable. I had just left and didn't talk to them for the remainder of their meal, including when I dropped off their food and got them the check. She cried the whole meal, and it was a very emotional scene. And I'm not entirely sure what happened, except maybe a divorce or a death in the family. Story 14. This was just before Tinder and dating apps were a thing. It was a blind date, guy and a girl. Now the guy shows up first, and he's excited until he sees his date. She had their mutual friend show him an old photo of her because she had just gained significant weight. You can tell that he was let down, but decided to make the most of it. They ordered drinks and appetizers, and they didn't even get appetizers out before the guy noped out of that date. He sat at the bar asking us to bring the appetizers to him there. Her weight wasn't the only thing that he was lied to about. Her personality and his clashed so hard that the date didn't even last 10 minutes. He hung up well after she left. We, the bar and the waitstaff, invited him to hang out with us at the bar after work. Ended up being a pretty cool guy. Story 15. Eastern European couple walks in. She looked like she'd been crying, but they ordered and seemed nice enough. A few minutes later, I heard a commotion going on in my section, and I got there in time to see this man reach over and slap the woman hard enough that the whole lounge heard the sound. He looked like he was gearing up to hit her again, so I instinctively stepped in. I was and am a small petite woman with no martial arts training or anything, and told him to back off and leave or the cops would be walking him out. Surprisingly, he did just leave without a fight. What was disturbing is that the woman very quickly composed herself, and by the time that I went over to check on her, seconds later, she was already brushing it off like it was an everyday event. I guess it was for her. I told her that I would feel better if she could stay in the lounge for a bit so that she could be sure that the man was gone. And she agreed, and I got her a few drinks on the house. Once she was a little bit opened up from the drinks, she told me her story and about how this man brought her to the United States and that she was afraid that if she left him, she would end up being forced to go back home. She also warned me never to date an Eastern European man, and most of them were like that. I wanted to take her to the police or to a women's shelter, but she refused and wandered out into the night. I never saw her again, but I hope she was okay and away from that man. The situation described is truly heartbreaking and concerning. Domestic violence is a serious issue that affects people from all backgrounds, and it's important for everyone to know the signs and know how to intervene safely like this person did. It's unfortunate that the woman in the story felt trapped in her situation and did not feel comfortable seeking help, but it's important to remember that leaving an abusive relationship is complex, it's difficult. It is crucial to offer support and resources to anyone experiencing domestic violence and to take action when possible to protect their safety. In the comments, has anyone witnessed anything like this where a good Samaritan or yourself had to step in? Story 16. Late to the party here, but I will share my story. Had a couple come in one night and everything seemed to be going fine. We had just hired a new server who was training, and I asked her if she had any questions. She was still nervous about greeting tables, so I told her that she could shadow me and watch what I do. We go over to the couples table, and all I hear from the new server is, "You a-hole, I knew you were cheating on me." Turns out the guy was her boyfriend on a date with his side chick, and he didn't know that she had just got a job there. She didn't get fired for what she said. Story 17. Not a waiter, but I was working as a supervisor in a restaurant. And there was some drama that lasted for a couple months. There was a couple that came to lunch every day, and every day they went to the toilet together for like 20 to 30 minutes. As you can guess, they were having some adult time. It was inappropriate, but we couldn't really do anything about it. And one day she came to the restaurant with another man, and he was her husband. And that was a pretty awkward moment. So she started to come to the restaurant with her husband on the weekends. But one day, as usual, she comes to us with her other lover. Now they're arguing, and as I've understood, they've now broken up. She was crying and so on, and after that fight, I've never seen any of them ever again. It looks like this couple had a serious case of restaurant romance. They must have really enjoyed the ambiance of the bathroom, but it all went down the drain when her husband showed up. I guess some things are better left to the privacy of one's home, or at least maybe a more discreet establishment. Lesson learned: when you're playing with fire, prepared to get burned.